Hello the world, hello the internet, hello of course to Jason Isaacs, and here's a new one just to keep things fresh. Hello to Tim from Egg Chasers Rugby. Love what you're doing over there. Okay, I'm Paul, and this is Paul Talks Politics, so I should probably start talking politics. Specifically, I should probably start talking about this lot, the Conservatives. This is going to be a presentation largely about the party, but we are going to talk about the ideology, because you obviously have to frame it in the context of the ideology. But this is about the evolution of the Conservative Party from where it started to where it is today, and it's going to be a long one, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge because my most popular video to date has been one on Thatcher, and we're going to cover Thatcher in this and see eventually where that takes us. And that's enough for the intro. I'll be right back after this little tune. See you in a minute, guys, and thanks again for coming. Paul Talks Politics. Like and subscribe. See you. Okay, so that was nice. Let us crack on then with the Conservatives. We are going to go all the way back to the start, and we're going to look at conservatism in a bit of context and what it all means with. We're going to start up here. Let's see if I've got my pen working. Where are we? We're up here. We're up here with this fella here, which I'm sure you know to be Hobbes. And then from Hobbes we are going to go to Burke, and then from Burke to Disraeli, and then down to Thatcher. And of course, as I said earlier, Thatcher, probably my single most popular video to date. So yeah, we'll talk about that. So he's got a picture of a dung beetle and the title of Organic Society. Let me try to explain what I'm doing here, and it's going to be a fairly extended metaphor, and perhaps it's going to help. I hope it does. When I think of conservatism, I always think of organic society, and when I think of organic society, I think of a dung beetle who is moving that ball of dung around the savannah for whatever purpose it's got, presumably because it's got nothing else better to do. All the while, what it's doing is that dung ball is growing and growing and growing, getting more and more complex and more suitable, if you like, for purpose. Now, I don't want to upset the Smithsonian, so I've probably got this covered about fair use at 30 seconds. The main point here is that as that beetle pushes that ball along, it grows and it grows and it grows. So with the Conservatives, society, that concept of the organic society, it grows and it gets better and it becomes more sophisticated and it becomes more fit for purpose. Now, what is that purpose? The purpose, very, very simply, is life, the universe and everything. For those of you who like your Douglas Adams, it's 42, but really it's infinite. Life, the universe, and everything poses an infinite amount of problems to humanity. The individual, on the other hand, is finite. Doesn't matter who they are intellectually limited, they are psychologically dependent, and they are obsessed with present bias. So the individual is finite. So how on earth are you going to resolve the infinite problems that life, the universe, and everything presents? Well, you can do it, but only under a very certain set of circumstances. Now, remember that ideologically, conservatives travel light. They don't believe in big ideas, and the reason why they don't believe in big ideas is very simply because, as we said earlier, the individual is finite, while life, the universe, and everything is infinite. And one simple idea is never going to solve all of those particular problems. You can't say, well, everyone's going to be free, that solves everything. You can't say, well, everyone's going to be equal, that solves everything, because they just are storing up problems for later. The Conservatives argue that the only way to solve infinite set of problems is to have an infinite problem-solving computer. And that is essentially the idea of organic society. So we have an individual who is finite, but if we have an infinite number of finite individuals, then effectively we have achieved that model of infinity. And that way, an organic society, one that learns, one that evolves, one that endures heuristic process, if you like, will over time be able to resolve the problems that come up. It's never going to resolve all of the problems because every problem keeps coming at you, and once you've resolved all the problems, there's still the big problem of what to do next. But the key thing is that the organic society can evolve and learn, and this essentially was the genius, if you like, of the founding fathers of conservatism. So we're going back to them now once this slide allows me to process. But the critical point here, the organic society, the whole being more than the sum of the parts, and that sense of institutional memory, whereby society evolves and learns and improves through heuristic process. And we can see that if we go back and we look at the origins of society, of the origins of conservatism. So with Burke, we have the failure of the state. Now, the failure of the state was internal. We had the royalists against the Roundheads against the Cavaliers. So we had the English Civil War. And because the state failed, obviously society was imperiled. So society basically fell apart. So Hobbes was living through all of this, and that's when he wrote Leviathan. And he argues that without a strong state, society basically dissolves or devolves to the lowest common denominators. That is, nasty British solitary and short, or the war of all against all. And so the job of the state is to preserve the status quo, because the status quo is what society needs in order to do that evolutionary, evolving, gradual improvement process. So here we see Hobbes saying, look, the job of the state is to sustain society, because without a strong state, society will devolve, will completely fall apart. And that basically survived until we have the French Revolution. Here again we see the failure of the state, except on this occasion it was the failure of the state to respond to forces from below, specifically the revolting peasants. And Burke, when he was writing his reflections on the revolution in France, said that we can't just have that static model that Hobbes argued for, because if we have that, then the state cannot evolve to meet the challenges that are coming. And so his key point there was that idea of being ordered to change in order to preserve. Now we hold our traditions because they're important for maintaining order and establishing that sort of sense and structure that organic society needs. So we're not going to toss everything out, but we do have to accept some form of reform, because if we don't, then we are inviting that revolution that he was witnessing going on in France. So again, here we're seeing the state failing to protect organic society. In France, he was watching as they were chopping heads off left, right and centre, and then the terror took over and they basically replicated all the same stuff. And so all of the good stuff in society was lost. Yes, there were problems there. There were all sorts of terrible problems in France, just as there were terrible problems in Britain at the time. But the solution to that problem, Burke was very, very keen to make clear, was not revolution, because if you had a revolution, you lost all the good stuff, as well as getting rid of the bad stuff. So you had to change in order to conserve. So that was your traditional conservatism, if you like. And when we go into ideologies, we'll go into this in much more detail. But the next phase of the evolution is your industrial revolution, where we have the threat to the state is now from external forces, if you like. It's socialism, and it's an idea, and it's coming with the force of history and science allegedly behind it. And Disraeli, criminally not on the syllabus, wrote this wonderful thing here from Sybil, and this is where we get that idea of the of two nations. So one nation conservatism emerges from this. Again, the job of the state is to protect society, to protect organic society from the threat of socialism, because if we have that social revolution, will it correct some of the problems in society? Possibly. Will it create other problems? Probably. So let's play safe and let's see what we can do to introduce reform while upholding those principles that govern the organic society, that pull the organic society together. These ones here, as articulated by Burke last time, we've got to hold organic society together, because that's where the wisdom is. The wisdom is not held by individuals or by groups, it's held collectively by all of society. And that is the core thread that runs all of the way through conservatism. Right, so I promised you a table. Let's have a look at that table. We see here the evolution of that conservative thinking across these various models. Hopefully my pen is now working. It's been playing up a bit. But we start, as ever, with the flawed human nature. The state has to be strong to uphold law and order. certainly from within and of course without. The social policy is basically just upholding law and order, and as far as economic policy is concerned, we're really just concerned about protecting property rights. That doesn't change massively as we move into traditional conservatism under the Burkean, nor does the idea of the law and order, but for the first time we see the idea of trying to get on the front foot to prevent revolution. So we do see a degree of change there. The state is still strong and the individual is still flawed, but we are starting to welcome or accept that some things have to change. Otherwise, we may see people taking events into their own hands. But that goes through a further evolution now as we move into one nation, where we've still got a flawed state, but it's a flawed individual. But now the state's taking an active role in trying to manage society, because if they don't, then again we're looking at revolution. Socialism is coming along and it's presenting a real alternative, and so we need to see more progressive policies coming through, a more inclusive sort of social policy, and again the use of economics to try to narrow that gulf between the rich and the poor, so that we don't have that revolution. Essentially, what we want is something like this. This is our classic one nation economic model, whereby we take from the wealthy, we take from the well-off, and we give that to the poor, getting them critically above this line here, above the breadline, so that they are no longer seeking radical solutions under their own power. Is that a patronizing position? Yes, it is. But the whole point of conservatism is that there is a hierarchy whereby, in theory, going up this line, in the perfect world, these people here know more than these people here do. We have a natural hierarchy. And so, yes, we do see a slightly patrician, at best, patronizing, at worst, approach towards the poor. The key point here is that this is not about principle. This is about pragmatism. This is fear, as one of my students memorably put it, not idea. And I do apologise for my handwriting. I have got my pen working, but it does not really helping. Fear, not idea. A really nice way of thinking about conservatism, because of course we can use that to contrast with socialism, where we have ideas, not fears. But anyway, there we go. This is one nation conservatism, taking from the rich, giving to the poor. Wisdom, of course, going up the social scale along with the wealth, and then that bit of patronising hand down to prevent the poor from revolting. That basically survived all the way through, from Burkean, from Disraeli, all the way through into the Second World War, where it went through an evolutionary phase again. And here we see the possibility of government. Governments around the world got together and fought this incredible war that literally changed the shape of the earth. And the thesis then became, well, if that's what government can achieve in the course of a war, what can it achieve in the course of a single society, in the course of one generation? And so we see traditional Labour embracing social democracy. They'd moved away from radical Labour, radical socialism, in order to be elected in the 20s. But the critical idea here becomes, if the government can engineer progress, if the government has the ability to create change, then it should engineer progress. Again, we're looking here at ideas. This is what's coming from socialism, and largely adopted by the Conservatives, because it obviously made sense. What they didn't really want was to see the socialists taking over and coming out with any radical policies. But essentially what we had here was a convergence. We had a convergence of outcome, in that both really wanted the managed economy, both wanted social cohesion, but again we see that divergence of rationale. This is all about fear, whereas this is about ideas. This is about fairness. This is about principles, whereas this is about pragmatism. All the way through that contrast. But anyway, after the Second World War, we have this convergence of policies, even if it was for different reasons. We have a managed economy, social cohesion, essentially up here what you might call Keynesian economics. If I could spell and get my pen to work, Keynesian economics. Whereas down here we got that divergence, a radically different way of getting to that particular outcome. And just before we get on to Thatcherism, it did dawn on me there's a critical point that we should make at this point, that the critical, or rather fundamental thing under Keynes is to try to achieve full employment. Now again, that is a really useful way of distinguishing between these different ideological strains, because we have Keynesian ideology here, which is saying let's get a full employment, let's have the government managing the economy to generate full employment, because that is a goal in itself and of course has benefits for the economy. As we move into Thatcher, we move to a completely different economic model, and this is where we are now. So we're coming in to 1979 and we are seeing Thatcher enter the scene. So before we start with Thatcher, we need, I think, to address this key idea. Now, remember, I did say that organic society is the thread that runs all the way through conservatism. And those of you who know your conservatism will know, well, hang on a second. If that's the case, well, what's about this? What about this? Who is society? There is no such thing. Now, did Thatcher say that? Indeed, she did. And everybody knows that. What not so many people know is what she went on to say next, which was this. It is our duty to look after ourselves and then also to help look after our neighbour, and life is reciprocal business and people have got entitlements too much in mind, etc., etc., etc. But the real bit is this. There is a living tapestry of men and women, and the beauty of that tapestry and the quality of our lives will depend upon how much each of us is prepared to take responsibility for ourselves, and each of us is prepared to turn around and by our own efforts help those who are unfortunate. Now, if that doesn't sound like a society to you, then I don't know how we might define society. Wow, that is really, really bad handwriting. Let's try that again. No. So Thatcher did believe in society. It just wasn't the same thing as the state. And in fact, that's what Cameron later went on to say. There is such a thing as society. It's just not the same thing as the state. Let's just get rid of those lines because it's really confusing. Good. So that to me, and I hope to you as well, sounds like a very, very good definition of society. And that pen is definitely not working now. Okay, so Thatcher did believe in society, but it was just a different version. It was not an entitlement society. It wasn't somewhere where people went to solve, to have other people solve their problems. It's a place where people went to help solve other people's problems if they could. But it was that living tapestry of men and women, the beauty of which depended upon self-responsibility, people looking after themselves. And then if they have any gas in the tank after that, can they then help other people? So Thatcher did believe in society, and this no such thing as society is generally taken completely out of context and used in a way that distorts the model and makes it look like she was not a conservative. You know, whether you're going to argue it makes her uncaring and heartless is not an argument I'm going to get into right now. But I think we can definitely say it makes her look dubious. It makes her conservative credentials look dodgy until we see the full quote, until we see that, yes, she did believe in society. It's just not one. It's not a society, or as she says up here, it's not the government's job to cope with it. That's really what that really is what she's arguing about. People need to sort themselves out, and once they've done that, they can become functional members of this organic society. That really is the key to understanding Thatcher. The other key to understanding Thatcherism is neoliberalism. Now, neoliberalism is both an economic policy and a social policy, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that as soon as we get down to the core idea. The core idea is growth. If your economic policy is organized around growth, then the economy is going to grow. That seems, fairly straightforward. The great thing about a growing economy is that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if you have economic growth, then in theory, let's see if we can get the pen to work. No, it's not going to work again. I don't know what's going on there. A rising tide lifts all boats. So the government's job is to create conditions that are going to deliver growth. And we would call those, if we're doing economics, monetarism, specifically low taxes, low inflation, economic efficiency, both economically efficient businesses and economically efficient individuals. So this is neoliberal economics. It's the policy of trying to engineer or to create conditions, that will enable people to create their own growth. The government can't deliver growth. It's far too complicated. The government is not an economic beast. It's the government is a manager at best. And all it can do is manage the economy so that individuals can make reasonable decisions. That's really what neoliberal economics is all about. So focus on low taxes, low inflation, economic efficiency. And if we can do that, then the economy will grow as individuals deliver growth. Now, the great thing about neoliberalism is that it also works particularly well as a social policy. If you've got a whole society of rugged individuals who are all doing the same thing, who are all working hard, who are all delivering to the economic the economic growth of society, then we're all playing the same game, and that's going to deliver a homogenous, healthy, vibrant society. No one's sponging, no one's slacking, no one's taking more than they're giving. We have a healthy collection of functional capitalism. Now, Thatcher, in addition to that, added a layer of neoconservatism, and neoconservatism in this context is probably best understood as social harmony through shared values and beliefs, law and order, national institutions, nationalism, religion, morality. Mrs. Thatcher was quite big on all of these things because she thought that, okay, it's all very well having everybody here and being neoliberal, and this pen has gone completely to heck, I don't know why I'm using it. It's all very well having everybody being a neoliberal, but it'd be even better if we all shared these same values, and perhaps nowhere is that better demonstrated than in the odious Section 28 of the Local Education Act of 1987, which prevented the promotion, allegedly, of homosexuality in state schools. So here we see the new right taking neoliberalism on one hand, that's economic policy, social policy, creating a society of good functional capitalists, and then adding to that an extra layer of social policies designed to create homogeneity, designed to create a society that is very similar, because the argument goes organic society is going to be that much more cohesive if everybody's doing the same thing. So we've got them all doing the same economic thing, and that's great. What we really want them to be doing is the same social thing as well, and that's going to make society even stronger. That's the thesis there. So that's the new right. In terms of economic policies, we've got neoliberalism or monetarism. With social policies, we've got neoliberalism and neoconservatism. And hopefully, if it works, you wind up with something like this. This was our one nation conservatism. We've rejected this because it's not generating growth. It's punishing these guys for working hard. They are losing out. They are not benefiting from this society. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to encourage growth, because if we can encourage growth, then we can see here that everybody is getting better off. Everybody feels like they're part of the process. Everybody feels like they are winning in society. This was the neoliberal economic theory. This is neoliberal economic theory, growth, and that growth serving as a social glue. We've got expanding income inequality. We're not bothered about that. Mrs. Thatcher said we don't need to worry about that. That is the politics of envy. This bit, however, down here is more of a problem. And the solution to it is work harder. Or perhaps, as I wonder if anyone's going to know who this is, the problem of the poor.
I grew up in the 30s with an unemployed father. He didn't riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and he kept looking till he found it.
Now, that was an infamous speech. Certainly I remember it from my dim and distant past. The idea was, if you were below the breadline, if you were poor, you didn't go out and riot. You got on your bike and you looked for work. If you're below the breadline, then you're not a capitalist. You don't have spare cash to invest in capital. You don't have the means by which to go and buy stocks or shares or the things that go to make other stuff, which is essentially your definition of capital. The conservative solution, work harder, get on your bike. And Tebbit took an awful lot of flack for that. But it did serve the purpose of encapsulating that conservative ideal at that point. This is important for later when we come to look at New Labour. So what was the net effect of these policies? We had social policy, we had economic policy. Well, what it did was it created a new economic society. There were push factors and there were pull factors that created this new version of society. We see push factors insofar as the old jobs were closing down, but the conditions were there for people to start new ways of life. So the government's shutting down inefficient industries, coal, steel, manufacturing, all of that sort of stuff. But it's also making life harder for the welfare state. So essentially what we've got are push factors. We've got the government pushing people towards a new way of working. At the same time, we've got pull factors. Now, remember, we were looking at that capitalism program. It's how can you encourage everybody to join your big capitalist society? Well, you shut down the jobs they were doing, but then you create opportunities for them to come and join your new capitalist society. So we have privatization. We're selling shares, particularly the selling of council houses. Very, very important idea there. Giving people who had never thought that they could possibly own capital of any way, shape or form a real slice of the pie. We're also deregulating the city, making trading easier. So now my gran, in addition to having buying her council house, she could buy BT shares. And this made her a capitalist. This was the most extraordinary thing ever. Never in her world, never up there in Ashington had she ever thought that she would own her own house or indeed own BT shares. Now she was a capitalist, effectively. But this is the other important bit. Remember, we were talking about that monetarist economy. We had low taxes, we had low interest rates, and we had low inflation. That meant that if you had been laid off from coal, steel, or manufacturing, then what you could do is take advantage of this new environment, buy yourself a van, and now, lo and behold, you're not a miner or a sheet metal worker or somebody who makes widgets. You are an entrepreneur. You have your man, you have your van, and you have your own business. And so what we see here is a fundamental change to the nature of society. The old way of life was basically shut down. The means were created whereby people, in theory at least, could embark upon this new capitalist adventure. And this is critical, and this is really, really important, because what you've got to picture here is the way in which it changed society. Now look, this is a very, very rough diagram. This is really just an allegory rather than any sort of core representation, but pre-Thatcher, this is more or less how society looked. You had the upper class who owned but didn't work, you had the working class who worked but didn't own, and you had the middle class who sat there and did the paperwork. Now, how did you win in elections? Well, basically you courted your own core vote, and the middle class would sometimes go that way and sometimes go that way. But we had that rotation of governments, whereby we had a fairly frequent turnover of governments. What Thatcher did was critical. We shrink down the working class. Remember those push factors, the way in which the industrial base was shut down? There were fewer people engaged in working class jobs. They now had vans. They now had their own businesses. Whether it's Trotter's Independent Trading, or they were working in Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Merrill Lynch or wherever it was. But essentially, we've seen a transfer of individuals from the working class into the middle class. At the same time, there was a sort of breakdown of the middle class. The upper class. Sorry, we see a wider share ownership. It's not like we were taking resources from the wealthy, but we did see a huge transfer of assets, certainly from the state to the middle class, and so we do see this vastly expanded middle class here setting up shop in the middle of British politics. And whoever won these guys' vote, well, they were going to win the election. So the way in which to win power now was to court the middle class. And of course, who were they going to vote for? Well, they're going to vote for the person who made them. So they voted for Thatcher again and again and again. And then in 92, they voted for Major, because Labour at that point was not a credible alternative. It took several beatings before Labour worked this out. We have Thatcher coming in 79. We have the majority returned in 83. And now, while the majority decreases, the changes in society are now being baked in, to the point whereby in 92, Labour thought that all they had to do was to turn up and win. Well, clearly that didn't happen. Instead, it took until 1997 when Blair transformed the party into something electable, into something that now that big middle class could reasonably vote for. It took that before Labour was able to return to power in 1997. And just in case there's any doubt, we should remember that Blair was basically considered Mrs. Thatcher's greatest achievement. I think she probably had her tongue wedged firmly in her cheek at that point. So since then, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. I have these various videos here, which I would urge you to go and watch. This video is long enough already. I will make sure I link off to them in the description. What I will briefly say, because this literally came through last night, this is the latest by-election, and it looks pretty grim for the Conservatives. Now, they might at this point say, well, had those had those votes gone to the Conservatives, would they have held Kingswood, southern Gloucestershire? Actually, this constituency is going to dissolve in the next election anyway, so it's a bit of a sideshow. Either way, it's catastrophic. Look what's happened there. They've gone from 56% of the vote to 34% of the vote. That's an extraordinary swing. The Conservatives are in terrible trouble, and these results could not really have been any worse for them. Perhaps Wellingborough, again, we're looking at unusual circumstances in that Bone was essentially desummoned, deselected, and but look at that, 62%. I think it's really quite remarkable. It's held at 25%. There, clearly, reform wouldn't have made a blind bit of difference. But I suppose for the Conservatives, they should be scared that they're seeing reform taking up those votes. Of course, these are by-elections. It would be very different in the real election. But the mood music there for the Conservatives is pretty terrible. So you are going to have to make sure you go back and you identify what's been happening to the Conservatives since then. Again, not within the scope of this particular video. I'm going to look at Blair next. So I hope to see you for that. In the meantime, please do enjoy your politics. Let me know if you've got any questions. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care now. Bye.